I'm Pamela, 30 years old, and I've been married to Patrick for 3 years now. We don't have children yet, though not for lack of consideration. Life had been moving steadily for us, until it took a turn I never saw coming. It all started with the unexpected death of Patrick's father, Jesse. The news of his sudden heart attack came as a shock. At the time, we were living in another state, focused on our careers, and building a life together. Our visits to Patrick's family had been infrequent, mostly limited to holidays, but we had always made an effort when we could. At the funeral, grief hung thick in the air, and amidst it all, Patrick's uncles subtly hinted at what was now expected of him. As the only son, and the youngest, he should consider returning home to support his mother, Mary. The weight of that expectation lingered long after the funeral, though Patrick didn't say much about it at first. A few months later, he came home and casually announced that he had secured a job transfer to an office near his family home. Just like that, he had made the decision, alone. I was stunned. Patrick, shouldn't we have discussed this first? He sighed, looking guilty but firm. I knew you'd object. I didn't want to fight about it. That stung.
A major life decision like this.
One that affected both of us, and he had gone ahead without even considering my input. Worse, he admitted why. Because he knew how I felt about Mary. Our relationship had always been strained, and he knew I wouldn't be thrilled about living closer to her. Patrick's mother had never been openly hostile toward me, but there was always an undercurrent of disapproval. Back when we lived farther away, she would complain about how rarely we visited, comparing us to his sisters, Amanda and Diane, who both lived nearby and made time for family gatherings. Patrick used to defend us, reminding her that traveling wasn't always easy, but it never seemed to make a difference. Mary's biggest grievance, however, was our lack of children. One summer, during a family visit, she had confronted me bluntly. Pamela, is something wrong? It's been 3 years, why haven't you given us a grandchild yet? The implication in her tone had been clear. In her eyes, I was the problem. That moment had solidified the unspoken tension between us, and though I tried to brush it off, it had always lingered. Still, after Patrick's announcement, I chose to move with him. I reasoned that we weren't going to be living with his family, and it would be unfair to let my reservations stand in the way of our marriage. To my surprise, Mary seemed genuinely pleased that I had followed Patrick. 3 weeks later, she extended an invitation for tea. I hesitated before accepting. It was the first time she had personally asked me to spend time with her, and though I had my doubts, I decided to give it a chance. When I arrived, I was greeted by Mary and Amanda. Pamela, it's been so long, why haven't you visited since moving here? Amanda's voice dripped with feigned politeness, but the sarcasm was unmistakable. Already, I regretted coming. Mary smiled, but her eyes were sharp. I was happy when you moved closer, but now I wonder, was I mistaken? You don't like me, do you? I wanted to say yes, just to see her reaction. Instead, I took a breath and replied, I don't dislike you, I just haven't been feeling well. Adjusting to everything has been exhausting. It wasn't a complete lie. I had been tired, emotionally and physically, but more than that, I hadn't felt welcomed. Mary's expression shifted. You don't like me, she repeated, as if testing me. Amanda, never one to stay silent, snapped. How can you talk to your mother-in-law like that? Apologize, now. I braced myself for Mary's usual sharp retort, but instead, she did something unexpected. You're right, she admitted. I've been mean. I'm sorry, Pamela, and about the children. I shouldn't have pried. Even Amanda looked startled by the admission. Mary sighed. I just wanted to hold a grandchild. Amanda's husband can't have children. Diane, well, she's been struggling. I thought maybe you and Patrick. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of something genuine in her eyes. I softened. We've talked about it, I said carefully. We just need more time. Mary nodded, and just like that, the conversation shifted. She turned on the TV, commenting on a news anchor she liked. The tension lifted, at least for the moment. That evening, when Patrick came home, he was livid. Mom said you told her you have no intention of getting along. She was crying. Pamela, what did you say to her?
I was dumbfounded.
What? That's not what happened, I protested. I told her it's been difficult, but I never said I didn't want to get along. But he wasn't listening. My phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. After moving here, weren't you prepared to make it work? If you're here with us, You need to be more patient. Patrick was staring at me, waiting for an explanation. I had moved for him, not to appease his family, but as I looked at him, the words slipped out before I could stop them. Maybe you should find someone your mother approves of. Patrick paled. Wait, how did we get to divorce? I shook my head, exhausted, because no matter what I do, it will never be enough. The next day, Patrick returned late, saying Mary had admitted to some misunderstanding. He brushed it off as unnecessary drama. Then, as if nothing had happened, he suggested celebrating Mary's upcoming birthday with a fancy dinner. I agreed.
Though unease settled in my gut.
The night of the dinner, we arrived at the restaurant to find Mary, Amanda, and their spouses already seated. The host led us to the table, but something was off. Happy birthday, Mary, I greeted with a smile. She didn't even look at me. Instead, she turned to everyone else. Thank you for coming, she said, as though I wasn't there. Amanda frowned. I thought this was a family gathering. Diane glanced at me, concerned. That's when it hit me, I was being deliberately excluded. And then came the final betrayal. I couldn't believe how easily Patrick had been manipulated, how quickly he turned against me in just a matter of minutes. The realization hit me like a blow. I was standing in the middle of a battlefield where I had never truly belonged. This wasn't my home. These weren't my people. When I confronted Patrick, my voice was steady but laced with exhaustion. You owe me an apology, I said firmly, my eyes scanning his face for any sign of the man I once loved. You owe everyone here an apology for letting this spiral out of control. Do you even hear yourself, Patrick? Do you even know what you've done? His reaction stunned me. Instead of remorse, instead of an ounce of self-reflection, he turned it back on me. You should be the one apologizing, he said, his voice laced with irritation. You upset my mother. You upset my sister. Maybe you should go home alone and think things over. Go home, alone. The words echoed in my mind, ringing with the weight of finality. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Of course, this was how it would end. Of course, he would choose them over me, the woman he vowed to protect. I won't apologize for something I didn't do, I said coldly, and I won't stay with a husband who takes his mother's lies over his wife's truth. I hadn't meant to cry, but as my voice cracked, as the weight of it all finally settled over me, I felt the sting of tears well up. I had given up my home, my independence, my peace of mind to follow Patrick here, and for what? To be cast aside like an inconvenience the moment it suited his family? Patrick's face paled, his hands clenching into fists. He saw my tears, and for the first time, real panic flickered in his eyes, but it was too late.
From across the table,
Mary watched the entire exchange with a smug smile, satisfaction oozing from her expression. She had won. I turned to Patrick, my voice sharp with the finality of a decision that had been years in the making. Next time, marry a younger, more obedient wife, someone who won't question your mother's every word. Maybe then you'll finally be happy. Mary wasted no time delivering the killing blow. Pamela, she said, her voice sickeningly sweet, why don't you just go back to your parents' house? A daughter-in-law is always an outsider in her husband's home. I could never see you as family. Her expression hardened. You're not charming at all, so please leave, quickly. Her words cut deep, but instead of pain, all I felt was clarity. I let out a breath and smiled, a real, unburdened smile. I would have left even without your permission, but I'd love to see who actually manages to get along with someone as twisted as you. And with that, I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the polished floor as I made my way toward the restaurant exit. Behind me, silence reigned. Patrick didn't move. His head was buried in his hands, as if finally realizing the full extent of what had just happened. Just as I reached the door, I heard my name being called. I turned to see Diane and her husband hurrying toward me, their expressions conflicted. Pamela, wait, Diane pleaded, breathless. I can't take this anymore. Mom and Amanda haven't changed at all. I knew the gossip about you was nothing but lies. Diane's words took me by surprise. For years, she had been a silent observer, never speaking up, never taking a side, but now, as she stood before me, I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weariness of someone who had been trapped in this toxic cycle far longer than I had. I'm done with them, she continued. I should have said something earlier, but I was too afraid. You don't deserve this. A small part of me found comfort in her words, but it didn't change the reality of my situation. Diane's support came too late to make a difference. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Mary's name flashed on the screen. I rolled my eyes.
What now?
But before I could decline the call, the screen flickered, Patrick's name replacing hers. Diane and her husband exchanged a look. You might want to go back to the restaurant, Diane said, an odd glint in her eyes. You might see something interesting. I hesitated. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to never look back, but curiosity, bitter and insistent, gnawed at me. I answered the call. Pamela. Patrick's voice was frantic. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was all a lie. I'll send the divorce papers later, but please, can't you come back, just once? I need you to see this. His desperation almost made me laugh, but it was Diane's cryptic words that made me turn back. When I arrived at the restaurant, I was met with an unbelievable scene. A crowd had gathered around our table, their eyes locked on Mary. And at the center of it all, a well-known TV announcer, one of Mary's favorites, held a microphone, her expression sharp with curiosity. Mary was flustered, stumbling over her words. No, that's not it. It's a misunderstanding. Patrick and Amanda looked humiliated, their faces pale as the announcer pressed further. We heard you say that Pamela is an outsider and should leave. Can you explain what you meant by that? I stood frozen, watching as the very people who had tormented me for years now found themselves in the spotlight, forced to justify their cruelty. Patrick saw me from across the room, his face filled with desperation. Pamela, please, he begged, don't let this get out. It was all a misunderstanding. But I wasn't his savior anymore. The announcer turned to me, microphone extended. Pamela, how would you describe your relationship with your mother-in-law? I met Mary's frantic gaze, then looked directly into the camera. I've never been called family, I said coolly, but I've been called unpatriotic for not having children. I've been blamed for things that weren't my fault. My husband and I agreed we weren't ready for kids, and yet, for the last 2 years, I've been told that's reason enough for a divorce. The restaurant fell silent. Mary and Amanda looked mortified. Patrick looked like he wanted to disappear. I took a deep breath, feeling an overwhelming sense of release. Since I was never truly considered family, I said, my voice clear and unwavering, then I guess it's time I leave for good. And with that, I walked away, ignoring the chaos behind me. The incident made waves in our local community, and though Mary managed to prevent the footage from airing, it was too late. The damage had been done, their reputation was in shambles. In the following days, I packed my bags and moved back to my parents' house. Patrick tried to stall the divorce, but my father, Peter, had no patience for his regrets. Sign the papers, he told him sternly, leave Pamela alone. Patrick's hands trembled as he signed, regret written all over his face, but it didn't matter anymore. For the first time in years, I was free. And I never looked back.